Morning, everyone. Some folks probably think that I used this pulpit up here to talk an awful lot about community, and that is very true. I'm going to do it again today. But I get to thinking it might be helpful for me to articulate as clearly as I can why I focus so much of my time up here talking about community. It's perfectly clear in my head, but it might not be so clear to the rest of the world, as Reverend Denise thankfully reminds me of quite often. So there's two primary reasons I spend a lot of my time up here talking about community. The first one is that your board hired me to be a developmental minister. Analyzing the health of this community and helping you to become stronger is kind of my job. It's what I was hired to do. So this one's kind of obvious. But the second reason is the one that might do with a little bit more explanation. But I think it is key to help you understand why I believe community is so important. And to do this, I'm going to delve into a bit of my theology. Theology, the word root, literally means the study of God. But as the world has become a little more secular, that definition has expanded into the way I'm using it today, which is to mean something closer to the study of big questions. Why we're here, what it all means, and thus what then we're supposed to do based on the answers to those questions. If I was to attach a label to my theology, I would tell you that at my core, I am a religious naturalist. And if you want to understand a little bit more about my personal theology, you can find threads in Ursula Goodenough's work, The Sacred Depths of Nature, or Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, or Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategies. I believe, and it's part of my Unitarian Universalist faith, I believe that all things in this universe are connected. And I believe that large systems are made up of smaller systems, simply replicated over and over again at scale. So even though I'm often up here theoretically talking about community, the concepts I'm talking about are almost always relational. And they are applicable to marriages or families, and ultimately right back to our relationships with ourselves. And it goes up the other way too. I believe that what happens here, and what happens here, and what happens here, like, all that stuff goes up. And it impacts what happens between couples. It impacts what happens between friends. It impacts what happens between congregants. And how strong those relationships are impact the wider community, up to the state level, up to the national level, and ultimately at the global level. What we see happening in this country right now is not an isolated anomaly. It is a reaction that is happening on a global level because I believe the systems of which we are a part have gotten out of balance. So said another way, the work of practicing community is the work of healing ourselves, healing our relationships, and ultimately healing the world. And that work, the work of healing ourselves and our relationships, benefits immensely from process. Because, and this is going to be hard to believe, but bear with me here, people can be messy, sometimes opinionated, sometimes different, sometimes sensitive, sometimes insensitive, sometimes brilliant, sometimes confused, sometimes loud, sometimes biased, and a whole host of other things that, if not properly considered, don't always flow together seamlessly, and if, pulling from a politician's word, can muck up the gears a little bit sometimes. So the truth is, when it comes to working within people systems, I am a total process wonk. Thoughts and prayers can absolutely help, but at the end of the day, I put a good deal of my faith in process, which many of you that have worked with me might not believe, because I sometimes struggle mightily to follow all the processes that I should. Leanne will tell you all about that in my expense reports and all that kind of stuff. So I will admit I struggle sometimes to follow processes myself. I do firmly believe in the importance of process. And good processes can actually form the foundation of a healthy community. Your board has hired me as a developmental minister. And one of the board members recently noted that it might be helpful to make the work that we are all doing under that umbrella a bit more clear, which is what I hope to accomplish for you today. Carl, I'm going to ask you to pull up. There should be a PowerPoint presentation up there. One slide. There are 5 pillars that fall under the category of developmental ministry, and we'll see if they come up here, possibly. Look at that. Carl, you are on it today. Thank you. Heritage, leadership, mission, connections, and future. These are the things that I am working on in conjunction with the board. So I'm going to go through these a little bit and talk about the processes that basically where we are in the process, what we've done, where we're at, and what we still have yet to do. So the first is heritage. This community has a shorter history than some. There are some UU congregations whose heritages and histories go back hundreds of years. This one's more like 25. But no matter the length, history is important. The experiences that this community has had together in the past shapes its behaviors today, whether you realize it or not. Just as each of our personal histories shapes our behaviors today. A big part of that look back in developmental ministry is uncovering where there have perhaps been some hurts in the past, things that might have damaged trust within the system. And trust is what we're talking about all month this month. It could be a major rift that happened between 2 different groups of members. I've seen that happen in churches before. It could be some malfeasance that happened between the minister and the community. It could be that something that happened between the local community and the larger UU movement. It could be anything. In general, I find this community to be pretty darn healthy. But a few folks are finally opening up to me about some things that have happened in the past, and that although subtle, do impact this community's way of being. A big one that is slowly starting to emerge is something that I knew about coming in, but I wait till people are ready to talk about it before I do anything about it. There have been a couple of ministerial transitions out of this community in the past that have come, let's just say, unexpectedly. These transitions came as a surprise, and some were not communicated about very openly, I'm learning. And although these transitions didn't involve glaring or public malfeasance, there was no like inappropriate behavior, there was no financial malfeasance. You know, the ways that these things happen consistently, I think, left this community feeling a little confused and abandoned in those moments of transition. So I think it's always important, I'm trying to remember when I talk about community to bring this back to our own lives. Have you ever felt abandoned by someone that you would put your trust in? If so, how did that impact you? Has it made it harder to trust people that you should trust in the future? The same thing can happen in a church system. If a community feels like the trust they have placed in someone has not been fully honored, it can make it hard for the community to be willing to place its trust in external authorities in the future. It's actually a natural defense mechanism which keeps us safe. But of course, a community is not a monolith. Each person that is part of this community brings their own history that has created more or less tendency within them to trust others. Some are more easily able to trust than others. Some have had horrible experiences with religion and ministers in other faith traditions. Some have had fabulous life-affirming experiences. It all goes into the mix, which is what makes a community stronger. There's different perspectives that, if we can tap into them, can help us make better collective decisions. So I feel like part of my job, if trust has been damaged in the past, either within this system or within the people that I'm speaking with, I think part of my job is twofold. And the first is to try to serve as a model of trustworthiness. To give you an experience with a minister to add to your collection that says ministers can actually be good, and they can be helpful, and they can be a supportive part of our system. That's what I'm trying to do with my way of being. The second part of this is to help this community develop a clear, wide-eyed perspective of the role that you want a minister to play in this community going forward. Do you want the minister to be central to what you do, or do you want the members to be primary, with the minister playing more of a supportive role? These are the kind of questions I'll be challenging your board with and other leaders to wrestle with in the coming years. And all of this work, all that we do together, believe it or not, is fodder for each of us to examine our own relationships with the granting of trust. And in this day and age, literally, can you think of anything more important than being able to understand what can and cannot be trusted as true and safe? The second pillar of developmental ministry is leadership. Again, this place has had a lot of very strong leaders in the past. And you've done great work, and that can be really good. But any strength overused can sometimes become a hindrance. And because a community like this is strengthened by ensuring the inclusion of all voices, this is a place where process can really add a lot of value. Your board and some of the committees here have spent a good bit of time considering the concept of covenant. I said earlier that UUism is a container of ideas, and one of the central ideas of this faith tradition is the idea of covenant. Covenant is a very old word, originally used to describe the promises God had made to his chosen people. But over time, that word is morphed to include the promises we make to each other about how we intend to be together with each other. Your board spent a good deal of time really working through the process of crafting a covenant to ground their intentions of how they hope to work together, especially as we move forward and start to wrestle with some really hard questions. I gave them 3 questions to spark their thinking, and I think these questions, you can use these in your own relationships. These questions can be used to try to create a safe container where each partner in the relationship feels safe and supported. And those questions were, what agreements would you need to have in place to feel safe enough to honestly bring your every thought and wish and fear and desire and hope and concern and shame and whole self into our discussions? That level of honesty and vulnerability and genuinely, this is who I am, this is my fears, this is what I think, that takes a lot of courage and trust to be able to actually put out into the world, especially if you have a sense that your thoughts are a little bit different than what the groups are. But we need all those things in the mix. The second question, what would you be willing to do to ensure that this same space, safe space, is created for others? And finally, once we create a safe container together, how can we reset this space if something happens to make us feel unsafe yet again? With this agreement in place, the next thing the board worked on is a right relations policy, which was just published, I think, in the last month. And this policy, now that it is in place, can be called into practice whenever someone in the community feels that another's behavior has violated one or more elements of the covenant, creating an environment that feels outside of the agreements that all have agreed to abide by. Did you all know that there is a congregational covenant? If you are a member here, part of your agreement to become a member is to hold up the covenant of this community. Does anybody know where they can find the covenant of this community? Anyone? All right, we have some work. Board, we have some work to do. Okay. If you're a member, go into the member section. You'll see it right there. Lots of bullet points about how we plan to work with each other. This is work that we will continue to do. And then next question I had was, do you know what to do if you have a disagreement with someone that runs the risk of hampering your ongoing relationships? These processes can all be found within the members section of the website. And I would really encourage you to look at these documents and refamiliarize yourself with the contents. Because we are getting into a time where hard decisions are going to have to be made. There are things happening in the world that are going to call upon us to decide how we want to position this community and what we want to do. Those conversations benefit from a good, safe container and good processes to help us be able to manage those things. Do you have these types of processes in your personal relationships? If you're married, your vows are actually a covenant. And the best process for ensuring covenants remain vital and useful is to pull them out and review them from time to time to ensure they're still valid and being practiced with intention. And some couples even renew their vows, which is ultimately a process of recovenanting. And you can do this on an individual basis as well. What promises do you want to make to yourself? What structures can you put in place to ensure that you keep the promises front of mind? And how do you want to proceed if you fail to live up to your commitments to yourself? Does everybody always, do you keep all your New Year's resolutions? Do you always do everything you say you want to do? No. What do you do other than beat yourself up? How do you get back into covenant with yourself? The next pillar of developmental ministry is looking at your mission. What is this community's ultimate reason for being? We began this work this year, but we got a little sidetracked by a leadership transition a few months ago. But this work does remain important, and stay tuned for more information coming soon. Related to and informing this work is another process we're about to enter, which is the annual budgeting process. And to me, a budget is nothing more than an organization's decision about what it finds important to invest in. There are always more needs than funds, and a big part of the budgeting process is working through differences of opinion about which things should be higher priority, which is one of the reasons why having a clear mission helps the process. These conversations can get to the heart of what this community means to people, which can sometimes lead to charged conversations. And when this happens, we return to our covenant and help us remember to prioritize our relationships over any one disagreement how to proceed. And this is where we can really practice this process. Through the rest of this year, as we continue to focus on bringing this community's reason for being into its next chapters to life, we'll begin to fund your priorities, and the next developmental step in ministry is connections. Most any thriving church community is energized not only by the work that's done on Sunday morning in this room, but by the connections that you can see between the work that you do here and the impact that you are having in the larger world. The mission work will really inform this focus. Are you a church focused on ministry to families, broader social justice work, deepening each individual's spiritual life? How are the values that you practice here being amplified in the larger world? The last pillar of this developmental work is to envision where you want to go in the future after you have completed these other tasks. A big part of this question, based on the work we've done to this point, is determining what skills and attributes you will need in a minister to help bring those next chapters to life. So all of that in a nutshell is a synopsis of the focus of my work on behalf of this community over the last year or so and going forward. We are engaged in a mutual process of discovery, using processes that have been developed over many years with best practices that have been learned and honed across hundreds of different communities. I think the work of church is actually process work. And the process work at church can be the same process that helps us learn how to be better humans and better partners and better students and better citizens of the world. So to bring this around full circle and wrap things up, a church like this is a playground for ideas. And the best and only way to truly get the most value out of this church community is to become involved. Because by becoming involved, you become a part of the system. And this system is based on the practice and creation of creating healthy relationships. The actions that we take together, how we decide what actions to take, and how we work together on this journey are the places where we can practice the skills it takes to be in healthy relationships with ourselves, with others, and with the institutions that structure our lives. I know our world feels a little off kilter right now, and many of us come here searching for guidance about what we can do to help get things back on track to something that feels at least a little less chaotic. Being connected to a healthy community that is following processes designed to help it ensure it learns from its past, decides how it wants its members to treat each other, determines collectively what is most important, and then puts programs in place to bring these important things to life. These are the steps that can help us feel like we are taking some of that control back. Beloveds, trust the process. You are doing great work. We are all learning new things along the way. And I have confidence that if we just keep following the steps of the process journey we have embarked upon, we will all end up in a better place together than we ever could have on our own. We need each other. The world needs us. Blessed be, and may it be so. Our closing words today come to us from Reverend Scott Walker, titled A First Step Faith. Go with faith, not the kind that is called to move mountains, but the quieter sort that calls us to take the first step, even when the whole staircase sits beyond our view. As we stride towards the unseen, may we notice the way that unfolds, only as we risk traveling it. And may we remember and trust that none of these steps are ones we take alone. A couple of things I want to point out before we break. I want to make sure, the board wants to make sure that every hope, dream, desire that is out there in this community is heard and listened to and is lifted up. John Drury, can you raise your hand? If there are any topics that you'd like more lessons on, that you'd like to say, hey, could we have a second hour where we learn about this, that, or the other thing? Talk to John. He's helping me organize those things. That's a way that you can get what you want to see at this church brought to life. Can board members raise your hands? All right, we got Mike and Claire and Carl. We got Rob and Mike and Stephanie. Take a look at those faces. If you are new here and you're like, hey, how does this work at this church? Do you ever do this? I'd love to see this. I saw this at a different church. I don't see that here. Talk to these folks and they can help put you in touch with how these things happen. This is your church. You get to make it what you want it to be. There's a lot of good things happening. Let's keep that going. I think there's something happening at second hour. We're doing the voting things. I was out meeting with Representative Gwen Moore yesterday. What a firebrand she is. There was overflow. There was so many citizens from my district there. There were 50 people that couldn't even get into the room. And she spoke for an hour and a half, and we waited, and we got in, and she stayed with us for another hour. There is a lot of life happening in this country right now, pushing back against things. And we need each other to be strong. We need each other to show up in the ways we can, and we need to keep learning how to do that better. So this is the container. This is the place where we can do those things. Talk to the people that just raised their hand, and let's get involved. Thanks, everyone. Be well. Be safe.